Welcome to our Extreme Ownership Academy live training. This is specifically focused today for first responders, and Jason Gardner, one of our senior instructors, will be taking the lead on a topic and presenting here for a little bit, and then we'll be switching over for the remainder of the hour for question and answer. So if you, as Jason's talking, or if you've got questions or things that you want to talk about, and we can talk about from a perspective of extreme ownership, leadership challenges, etc., start putting your questions in the chat box. And when Jason finishes up, I'll be going through those questions and we'll be talking about them here together. So it's an opportunity for us to kind of sharpen the sword against one another and talk about how to solve problems through leadership. So welcome to our first responders live training. Jason has got the lead here. So Jason, whenever you're ready, I think we just another moment or so, folks are connected. I think we're ready to go.
Hey, everybody. Jason Gardner here. If you don't know me, I'm a retired Master Chief with 30 years in the SEAL teams and Echelon front instructor for the last 2.5 years. Worked in that capacity. I've worked with a ton of first responders, fire, police, paramedics, and etc. And one of the common complaints or frustrations I hear coming from people at the tactical level, and by that I mean the folks that are out there actually doing the job, is there's a tendency to get frustrated with your leadership. And by that I mean typically it's like maybe your police chief is somewhere different, or maybe your battalion chief is somewhere different, and there's these frustrations these develop. And common complaints that I hear is like, hey, my leadership is out of touch, or they're up there, but they didn't really do the job. They didn't put all the years in on patrol. They're politicians. They don't take ownership. And when I say politicians, it could be that like in any municipality, you're all working for politicians, right? And so it could even be them that you're talking about. So when we look at these complaints from the foundation of extreme ownership, and you say that like, hey, my leadership's out of touch, or they don't know what's going on. Well, are you in touch? And hopefully the answer is yes. And then, well, then it's on you to make sure that you're communicating up the chain of command so that your leadership understands what's actually going on at the deck plate level that we called it in the Navy, the term where the rubber meets the road. Or they don't take ownership. Okay, got it. If your leadership isn't taking ownership, what can you do? Well, you can take ownership, and that's the best way for you to set the example, because taking ownership is contagious. So in that mode, if you want to be able to communicate up the chain of command, or you want to be able to push information up to your leadership, step one here is you're going to have to develop a relationship with your senior leadership. And the way to do, set up opportunities where you get to see them face to face. Now, when I was a command master chief of SEAL Team 5, and I worked for the Commodore, who is an 06, that's a Navy captain, and he's in charge of all 4 SEAL teams on the West Coast. And, you know, that guy has got a lot on his plate, right? And every once in a while, he would want to come over, and by this, every once in a while, probably once a quarter, he would want to come over and visit a SEAL team. And then there were a couple times that we were on the hook, we'd give him a briefing. And there were a few ways that people dealt with that. The first way was to send everybody home. They would say, the Commodore's coming over tomorrow, so everybody get out of here and close all the doors and limit his access and his staff's access to the people. Well, it's a tactical victory in that the Commodore isn't going to see anything he doesn't like, or anyone's not going to say anything silly to him. It's not a strategic victory, okay? So the way that I like to deal with it, and I dealt with it when I was in that leadership role, Um, the day before the Commodore comes over is at our morning meeting in our quarters, we called it, and that's where we all got together, and I'm talking to everybody. So this is not just at O call where I'm just talking to the leadership. This is when I'm talking to the whole command. Hey, everybody, tomorrow the Commodore is coming over at this time. So what that means to you is that I need everybody to be in a decent uniform and make sure you've dragged a razor across your face and your hair is cut so you look good. Because, hey, if the guy doesn't know you and if you're out of standards, he's going to think you're not professional. So let's all make sure we're looking professional tomorrow. And then let's all make sure that when we greet him, that you say, good afternoon or good morning or whatever time of day is, Commodore. That's his title. That's the professional way to greet him, because when we act professional, it gives us freedom of movement. And we want to treat the Commodore as if he's an uncle that we haven't seen in a year, and he's our favorite uncle, and we're glad that he's back, and we're going to treat him with respect. And I want everybody who sees him, I want you to actually interact with him. Because at the end of the day, when he's done coming through SEAL Team 5, I want it to be a positive experience for him. So arming all my subordinates with that and attitude, when the Commodore came by, invariably, every time he came over, it was a good experience. We made him feel like extended family when he was inside of our compound. And you know what? What did that mean? That meant that we'd now developed a relationship, and that meant that he had a soft spot in his heart for us. Going overseas to deployment. Overseas, when we're deployed, we're working for flag officers, and that this is an 07 or above. So this is like any general or admiral. And in one case, we were working directly under an Australian admiral. And we used the same protocol. And by this time, everybody was really practiced at it. So that when that general admiral came around, everybody looked professional, everybody engaged with him. And it was a positive experience. And these guys, when they get out of their office, they're trapped in their offices. They're kind of miserable. They're really eager to get out and see people, right? And so when it's a positive experience, it's great. And then that makes them want to come around more. And when they come around more, now you have these opportunities in an informal session to give them feedback, and we also talk about listen, respect, and influence. We listen to them and we see what their priorities are. And then we're able to say, hey, maybe you could help me understand this, because this policy that we're going through right now, we're having trouble executing it at our level. And you're not going to have that kind of access until you develop relationship and rapport with the senior leadership. And so for instance, in Iraq in 2016, 17, when we were there at SEAL Team 5 and we were Special Operations Task Force West, and we were engaged with getting, running ISIL out of the country. We were focused on getting them out of north, but we also had platoons out west. And we were real eager to get into the fight out west in Western Iraq, where ISIL still had a good foothold. And, we sent a con-op up where we wanted to set up this remote station out west. And the Australian general denied it. But then what he did was, and this guy was so cool, he came over and he spent 45 minutes with us, and he said, hey, fellas, here's why I denied your request to build this outstation out west to get the fight. And he's like, we got limited resources. There's still a huge fight up north in Mosul. Mosul isn't cleared yet. And so focus all our efforts up there, and then we'll shift out west. He didn't have to do that. He could have just been over there in his office that was over in a different compound and just said no. But he came over and he did that because we developed this relationship with him.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, and also, like, remember, these
I gotta mute you, Seth. Sorry about that. Hot mic. Anyway, so I got one more story that I want to tell you here before I close this out. And this is referring to my 2014 and 15 deployment. And I was deployed to the Middle East. I was a senior enlisted advisor for the CENTCOM. That's the Central Command Crisis Response Element. So we were on the hook for anything crazy that might go on in the Middle East outside of Iraq and some of the things that are already gone on there too. So I'm working directly for the embassy. And diplomats are very different than those of us in a direct action role in the SEAL teams. We're going to get after it. The diplomatic option is always completely different, and they're a different type of person. And so if you're out there and doing the street, it's the exact same thing that you feel, you know, if you're in law enforcement or you're first responder, in the politicians that you're actually working for at the end of the day, and the city councilmen. They're just different types of people. They're not necessarily action oriented, and that's okay. So I knew that when I went to the embassy, I was a bull in a china cabinet. And I knew that these people were fundamentally cut from a different cloth than I was cut from. And it was going to be a little bit more difficult for me more difficult for me to establish a relationship with them. So what did we do? Well, we went into the embassy one day and we checked with the embassy staff schedule, and we're like, hey, we noticed that they've got kind of downtime and they're free this weekend, and the ambassador's free this weekend. So we went in there, and about a month out, we said, hey, we would love to do a barbecue and a dog and pony show over at our compound and show you what capabilities that we bring to the table and how we train. And it would be a great opportunity for us to just, you know, grill some burgers and talk and meet each other. And so the embassy folks agreed to do that. And so then a bunch of them came out to our compound, which was, you know, we were on a little airfield not far from where the embassy was. And we had our vehicles set up. We had guys set up in all the gear. We had our boat set up. We had our comms gear set up. We had all of it set up. And then everybody was, you know, eager to interact, and folks would go through and, you know, was basically gave them a tour of everything we did. And then they got to take pictures with the guns. And I don't care who you are. I don't care who you are. You put someone next to a 50 caliber sniper rifle or a big gun, they're excited to take a picture with it. And so it was a great event. And then, you know, really where we made our money is when we were sitting around eating burgers and drinking sodas and just talking about, you know, who got to know all these folks on a first name basis. All right. In the last month of that deployment, and we did this about 2 months into that deployment, in the last month of that deployment, one of my SEALs got thrown in jail out in town. And I'll tell you, if there's trouble to be found, SEALs are going to find it. And so on a Friday night, he was out drinking we had a curfew there. We were supposed to all be back in bed by midnight, and he was still out drinking. And at 4 a.m, he just damaged a bunch of hell, and then got arrested by the Emirati police and thrown in Emirati jail, which is not a good thing. That happens on a Friday night. I find out about it on a Monday morning, that I've had a SEAL that's missing or that's in jail. And oh, by the way, he's been in jail since Friday night. What does that mean? That means Saturday morning and Sunday morning and Monday morning, I passed up a false muster. So the first thing I got to do is call the embassy and inform them that I've got one of my teammates has been in jail since Friday night. And when I informed them, and I said, and what that means is that I passed up 2 bad musters to you. And then I went, and as I said that, like, hey, we passed up 2 bad musters to you, or 3 bad musters if you include Monday. And here's the steps I'm taking to make sure it never happens again. Okay. They weren't happy. They weren't happy, but all I got was a fairly easy ass chewing, when I could have gotten, if I hadn't, I'm telling you, if I didn't establish those relationships with them, they would have punted me out of country and I'd have been relieved, which would have affected the rest of my career. Because this is, as I was the ops master chief, I would not have become the command master chief of SEAL Team 5. But because I took the time to develop those relationships with those folks up at the embassy, they didn't punt me out of country. Because honestly, as a leader, that guy going out in town and getting drunk and then passing up bad musters, that's absolutely 100% my fault, even though I'm separated from it by 3 levels. That guy had a history of doing stuff like that, and I should have been a little bit more proactive with him. So anyway, these are just some stories. I know this is a frustration that a lot of you have in the first responder community about, dealing with your senior. And so these are some tools, and just to reiterate them, get face-to-face interaction with your leadership. When they come, make sure your whole team is ready to interact with them in a positive way, and take the time to develop those relationships with them. Don't just hit them with your complaints straight away, because it's just going to turn them off. This is a long war. So you're going to take the time to develop those relationships with them. And then once you have the relationships with them, when you do have a complaint, you're going to come at it from this angle like, hey, chief, can you help me understand why we have this policy? Instead of saying this policy doesn't work. Or can you help me understand why we're doing things this way? And it may be, and you have to be honest with yourself, it may be that some of these policies, they're rated, that they actually need to be done. So keep an open mind at that as well. And with that, we're right on time here. We're going for like 15 to 20 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and we'll start doing some Q&A.
Thanks, Jason. So I'll just kind of weave in a couple things here real quick. So we got a couple hundred people on the call right now. So far, we got 1 question posted, and I'm not really surprised, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. So first of all, for those of you who may be relatively new to this, I see some familiar faces who join us on our Extreme Ownership Academy live trainings regularly, but there are many people on here who maybe this is your first time, or you've only been on a couple of times. In case you're wondering where some of these lessons come from, and things that we talk about around leadership, they come from the book Extreme Ownership. So this is not a plug, but I just want you to know this is where these principles come from. We have the laws of combat, the mindsets for victory, which are talked a little bit more in the dichotomy of leadership. But Extreme Ownership is the first book that Leif and Jocko wrote. And they're lessons learned from the Battle of Ramadi and Task Unit Bruiser. And so Extreme Ownership, let's talk about that. It's the title of the book. Jason just talked about the story about where he had one of his guys who was, wrapped up and got arrested in the Emirati jail, stayed out past the curfew. And I chuckled a little bit to myself. It's a few years ago, so I feel like I'm past statute of limitations here. But I found myself out past curfew, and I just lost track of time. I'd had a few things to drink, whatever. And the solution, Jason, is you failed to train your guys there. If you find yourself out past curfew, you just stay up all the way until 7 a.m. and just come walking in the next morning like you're showing up for work. You don't come in at 4 a.m. That's how you get caught. Just kidding. Not really, but yes. Anyway, back in earlier times when I was younger and dumber. Having said that, here's what happened, right? Jason told you what happened, and he called and he took ownership. And it wasn't just like admitting, it was 2 parts that I want you to pick up on. First, the first part, the hard part, he goes, this is what happened. It's my fault. I'm the leader. I made this mistake. And then here's the big second part. I have 2 fingers up, third part. And here's what I'm going to do to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So first of all, we live in a society and in a lot of cultures where people don't take ownership. Why don't they take ownership? They don't take ownership because they're afraid of being absolutely obliterated and crushed, losing their job, losing promotion, being ridiculed publicly, whatever. So it's like they've learned through basically as a survival mechanism not to take ownership, because we have cultures and organizations where we don't reward people for taking ownership. And then, of course, as leaders, if you think about anybody that ever came to you with a problem, after a while, it can just start to sound like complaining and whining. And nobody likes to complain, or nobody wants a squeaky wheel. You know, they say the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Usually it's the squeaky wheel gets changed. Okay. So, but that's why that last part is most important. Jason took ownership, but he followed up with, here's the solution. Here's what I'm doing to make sure that this does not happen again. And when you're in a position of leadership and somebody comes to you with a problem, they take ownership and they give you the solution at the same time, what do? You go, well, here's my solution. Okay, move forward with that solution. But when people come to you with only problems, you're going, okay, listen, you just put more on my plate, not less. Now you put this on my plate, I got to figure out how to fix this. Unless you come to me with a solution at the same time, and now you are the solution to the problem that you just presented, and I'm going to give you more responsibility. And that's what happened to Jason. Now, can it go the other way? When you take ownership, can you get fired? Sure. But what's the alternative? Either not taking ownership, you're going to be canned, or taking ownership, providing the solution, and then potentially given more responsibility and trust. And so ownership, to me, it is the answer in all situations, in all circumstances. But the reason that people don't do it is because they're afraid of being beat down, slapped down, put, in trouble. And which is also why I kind of thought, this is kind of why we don't have a lot of questions here. In the military and police, firefighters, first responders, very similar kind of cultures a lot of times. There's a presentation, and then we get down to the end and people go, oh, are there any questions? And there's kind of like, hey, dude, it's beer 30. Let's get out of here. Don't put your freaking hand down, or it's like, hey, were you even in that same brief? I answered that already. Nobody wants to look stupid. So people don't ask questions. So I want you guys to think about the cultures and the organizations that you're in. And if you're in a position of leadership, which really is everybody on this call, but if you have even one person, even if they're your peer, but they haven't been around long enough, then you're leading those people. Think about how you show up when somebody admits that they made a mistake, and be like, do you take that opportunity to pummel them or push them deeper into the corner? Or do you reward that and go, I'm impressed that you're able to see your role in that. So, and I'm even more impressed that you've already come up with a solution to that problem. That's the kind of thing we want around you. Like, are you encouraging that? Right? Or did you just respond in such a way that person's like, well, that's the last time I ever made a mistake, So think about those kinds of things in your organizations. It's hard to do. And when I left the military and went into the civilian sector and started working in business, it was a surprise to me, because what we want to do is we want people to take ownership. We want people to address problems. And then we want to check our egos at the door, and we want to talk about the solutions so that we can get better as an organization. The people will only do that. They'll only begin to raise their hand if there's trust that they can do so and be appreciated for that, for bringing a solution in a positive way to improve the organization, as opposed to being slapped as soon as they raise their hand. So just think about that. It's not something that if you start to think about this, that you can change overnight. It takes time. Last quick example, and then we'll go to a question about this.
Yeah, Blake.
What's that?
We have a lot of questions in now. Good.
All right. Well, so one quick example about this, it illustrates my point. I love dogs. I kind of feel like I'm half dog, and I bet you a lot of people on this call have dogs, or we even work with them in an official capacity. And I see this happen with like a young dog or whatever that gets off leash or is out running around, and they're like, get over here. They're trying to recall their dog, right? Recall is one of the most important things that a dog can learn. So they're trying to recall their dog, and a lot of times the dog doesn't really understand yet. They're playing, they think it's a game. Now you're trying to grab them, and they're like, oh, cool, I like this. And they like dart around you and run, whatever. Now the owner's getting more and more frustrated. They finally get a hold of their dog. They grab them and they hit them, or they scold them right when the dog did exactly what it was that they wanted them to do, which was to come back to them. So if they scold their dog and punish them right at that moment, sooner or later, that dog figures out, well, wait a minute, every time I come back, like I get in trouble. That's not right. So it's counterintuitive, right? So you actually, even though the dog was off running around, not doing what you wanted them to do, when they did finally come to you, you have to go, oh, good girl, good boy. And you have to reward them for coming back to you, because that's the behavior you want to reinforce.